to meet in person, my name is Joel Simonds. I'm one of the clergy. I was originally with University Synagogue. I have not been a full member of the pulpit team for a while now, as the executive director of the Jewish Center for Justice, but it is an honor to be able to do as much as I can with the pulpit and to be able to be here with all of you. So we're going to jump right in. And as I said to a few of you earlier, Chukat is a wonderful Torah portion, which has aspects that have been debated since the beginning, and I'm sure they will be debated until the end. So I really want us to engage in some of the aspects of Moses and Aaron's reaction, of God's punishment, of what Rashi and Maimonides and Nachmanides have to say about that. So for those that are following along, if you have a Bible or a Chumash in front of you, we are in the book of Numbers, chapter 20, Parshat Chukat, really in the middle of Numbers, where we are continuing this wonderful journey. So from last week, we really have this debate, this argument, if you will, of Moses and Aaron against Korach and his rebellion. And this week, we have a different kind of a debate. We have a different kind of an argument. Chukat, our Torah portion, begins with talking about an offering. And Moses and Aaron being asked to bring this red cow without blemish. We'll touch upon that in a little bit. But when you dive in deeper into the Parsha, we have this wonderful narrative where the Israelites, and we know we are traveling, we are exhausted, we are ones that have an opportunity to complain when we get the chance, and they're frustrating Moses and Aaron. Why did you bring us out here just to starve? Why did you bring us out here to be thirsty in this hot desert? And Moses and Aaron go to God and say, God, what do we do? And in this famous portion, and we're here in chapter 20, God says to Moses and Aaron, go back to them, speak to the rock, ask the rock to give water. And what happens next? Moses goes back to the people, and does anyone want to jump in and say what happens next? Does Moses speak to the rock, or does something else happen in this famous tale that so many people know? Would anyone like to jump in?
I think it's, if I may speak, I think he touches the rock and water comes out.
Right. Now, does he touch the rock, or does something else happen? David, I see your hand raised.
He smacks the rock with the staff.
That's right.
I mean, so it's potentially a gesture of frustration or rage.
100% in this moment. And Moses does something else before he smacks the rock with the staff. Does anyone remember what he said?
Yes, okay.
Please.
Yeah, he says we, not God, but we. He and his brother do it.
Right. And he calls them this name, and he calls them you rebels.
Yeah.
Right. So not only does God say to Moses and Aaron, go back, speak to the rock, right? Because in a sense, right, Moses and Aaron in these moments, they're God's emissary. So one can assume in this moment that whatever Moses and Aaron do, it's from the direction of God. And so when Moses and Aaron strike this rock, when they call the Israelites, you rebels, we are to assume that God is there in frustration, right? When you strike this rock, when you call them rebels, it's as if I'm striking the rock. It's as if I'm calling them rebels. And remember, we're still in this early stage of God in relationship, not only with Moses and Aaron, but God in relationship with the Israelites, with the Jewish people. So there is this moment of frustration from the Israelites. We're thirsty, we're complaining. How dare you bring us out here just to die? It's this moment of frustration with Moses and Aaron, constantly in this leadership role, in this go-between. And it's this moment of frustration with God. You come here, I give you instructions, and this is what you do. This is how you represent me. I didn't say hit the rock. They're going to think that I'm a God of anger. Now, we're going to debate about that in a little bit, because I think God has done plenty in previous Parshiot to show that God is a God of anger. But in this moment, it's not a God of anger. It's a God of calm. It's a God of understanding. So we have this. And then, again, we're going to do an overview, and then we're going to dive in. And then we have a few lines later where Aaron goes up with his sons to hand over the vestments. In a sense, Aaron is about to die. And Aaron is passing forth the priestly opportunities to the remaining sons. So we have this parsha of a cow without blemish, of Moses and Aaron being in touch with God, but then doing their own. And then we have Aaron passing away, Aaron passing on the baton. And then let us not forget the punishment. Moses and Aaron being unable to enter the promised land because, as the Torah portion says, because of this sin. Now, before we go any further, and I'm going to share with you what Rashi, Maimonides, and Nachmanides says, I was always taught by my mentors in the seminary, and I've really come to understand this. We have to look at Torah like this. It is not complete, right? This is Torah. There are lots of gaps. And this is Talmud, and this is Midrash, and this is commentaries, and this is us. So the way to read and understand Torah is by bridging it together. That we can't read Torah alone, because when we read Torah alone, we miss out. So we have to read Torah like this, right? And it's a way that we, especially we as modern Jews, look at continuing revelation. That revelation began at Sinai, and it continues on today. So every generation, from the generations of Rashi to Maimonides, to the generation of us, our job is to fill in those gaps. And that's how we make Torah real and relevant. And I think, we talked about this 10 minutes ago. We'll never stop debating Torah. And I think that's the beauty of looking at Torah this way. So that's our intro. Would love some of your thoughts. Those of you that have looked at this Torah portion beforehand, those of you that are just hearing it now for the first time, those that have studied it in previous years. I think we all come to this Torah portion, Chukat, and we all come to this story of the striking of the rock. And then what I think many believe is the harsh punishment. What do we gain from this understanding? What are some of our thoughts leading into this? Yes, Mara, please.
What I notice is that Moses doesn't apologize. He doesn't repent.
Mm.
And he's certainly given the opportunity.
Okay. Hey, with whom or to whom should Moses repent? To the Israelites, to God, or both?
Both.
Ah, okay.
I'm thinking that because Moses was chosen by God to represent God, that Moses is representing God's anger at how the people have behaved, complained, the whole gamut, and that Moses thinks that he gets to say what he wants to say, thinking this is what God would tell him to say. And that's why I said both.
I love that.
He got pissed at the people for their complaints, and it constantly ongoing for 38 years or something. And I mean, I can't imagine being with some people for 38 years and not being in the desert. But I mean, but I mean, I think that Moses thinks this is what he's supposed to do.
Ah, I like that. Okay, let's hear some other thoughts.
Can I speak?
Please, please.
I think perhaps one of the lessons we should learn over these many centuries, which some have learned, most have not, is speak first. Not do an act of violence, just doing something.
Great.
Until you speak first, see what you can accomplish. Not only should you do that to avoid violence, even death, but God specifically asked Moses to do this. He also put a staff in his hand. Now that's a little contradictory, because had he wanted him only to speak, was it necessary to give him a staff? What was the staff for? He could have raised his arms, and he didn't need a staff to raise his arms. And it's a lesson that few of us have learned. When we approach something in ire, when you approach something and we're already pissed off about it, because the Israelites complained so much in just a paragraph or two before that, they were so complaining. So we were angry when we spoke to them. In spite of that,
it's an excellent point. And then we have two other hands raised, and I want you to jump in, but I'll just say that what always fascinates me about Torah, and especially this Torah portion, and especially the comment you just made, is that not a whole lot has changed in the human condition since the beginning of these moments. That the burden of leadership weighs on one. And the need for balance and constant reminding oneself of their position is important. We see leaders today fall victim to that. We see ourselves in our own lives fall victim to that. And we have the example of Moses and Aaron falling victim to that. Okay, so let's go to our two individuals that have their hands raised. Would love for you to jump in and hear your thoughts. And then I want to share with everyone what Nachmanides has said, because I think it links to so many of your comments.
May I speak that last? I was going to say, I think
please.
it has to do with holiness and honoring God's commandments and the Torah, trying to obey them, but only God is holy, really. We try and strive to be, but he's the Holy One of Israel, our God, Adonai. So I think it's a matter of Moses, the crowd, we're community. We have to come together to study Torah and do the best we can do. And I think God is merciful. I just think God is merciful.
Thank you. Thank you. Lorraine, yes, you had your hand.
Hi. Hello, Rabbi. Hello, everybody. It's great to see you. It's interesting you ask about what catches our attention on this particular Parsha, because it's true that every year something different catches your attention. It's a little detail. So this year in particular, other years have focused on the items that you have talked about today. But this year in particular, I had a question. And if I can put that question out, then I can focus on the rest of the discussion. The question is specific to the coming in contact with the dead corpse, and the purification that happens afterwards. And I think that I can bring it into our current time. How would that apply to those members who partake of the Haber Kadisha, and how does that actually work? I was wondering if maybe you have some information about that, or maybe somebody else in the group has that, because it really stuck to me. I was like, oh, how would that work? And then the second item that I think that is important on this one that I didn't really think about in the past, in other years, was the death of Miriam, and how succinct was the mention, but how much she contributed on the sustenance. And I think that that small piece sometimes gets overshadowed by another very important event that you brought up. But I guess every year you kind of start digging into the smaller pieces. So those are my two things that I wanted to put out. Thank you.
What wonderful. I love that. And yeah, think about the power of this Parshat and what happens in Moses's heart, right? He loses Miriam and Aaron in this Torah portion. And yet, not a whole lot in this Torah portion goes into Moses mourning their loss. So just think for just a moment, from a purely emotional standpoint, what Moses is going through in this Torah portion. The burden of leadership, the constant complaining of the people, and the death of his siblings. There's a lot for him to carry in this moment. David, I saw your hand raised.
You know, the thing that strikes me about this is that Moses is set up to fail, and that the meaning of the story is that he fails. In some sense, the failure is he doesn't get to the promised land. But anyway, that's what I listen to this and I think he has been set up. Last time he used the staff, he was instructed to. This time he's given the staff, not your staff. Little article change there. He does it wrong. The guy can't win.
It's such a frustrating moment, right? But then, it also asks us to re-examine failure, to re-examine success. And this is something, it's almost become a platitude at this point, but this Parsha, but if you think about it, the narrative from Exodus to Deuteronomy, we'll put Genesis to the side for a moment, helps us redefine, is it the destination or is it the journey, right? And it's almost as if for Moses, his role is the journey, right? That the holiness is the journey. And I think sometimes we do Torah a disservice and we do the journey a disservice when we focus so much, and maybe it's the word promised, right? Like with so much emphasis on promised land, we tend to gloss over that the wandering, the journey was in itself a promised land, right? What did those 40 years do for us? It helped us understand what it meant to be a people, what it meant to be a free people able to serve God. Think about this. The only thing that we knew for generation upon generation upon generation was how to be an enslaved people with an enslaved mentality. We now get to have a journey in which we get to be a free people with a free mentality. We get to complain. Think about that. Think about like we always tend to put this like, oh, they're complaining again. They get to complain. They get to have the freedom of complaining. And maybe a part of the punishment is that Moses used, hey, you rebels, and hit the staff, almost hit the rock with the staff, almost reminding them of their time as slaves. Oh, you're going to complain? You're going to get anger. As opposed to, you get to complain. And never before in your time did you get to complain without consequence. So there's powerful aspects to this journey that's shedding them of that slave mentality and preparing them, I wouldn't say for the promised land, but preparing them for the next phase of freedom. Because if you think about it, we've yet to really embrace that promised land. We just continue to have that next phase of freedom, which is not always linear, right? It's gone like this a bit for us. Yes, please. Let's continue with the hand raise. And I'm loving these comments because I think we're getting someplace.
I have a really far out there question, Rabbi. It's about Miriam in the water, and she sang across the Red Sea, and it says the water a well, and the angels followed her. There was water everywhere. And I just want to, as a singer, I want to ask you a really out there question because I'm nobody, humble, just dust and ashes. But I really believe that the same spirit that's on Miriam can be on people who really love Torah and love God, are close to God. Not that I'm that close. God's closer to me than I am to him. But I want the water in California, the drought to go away. And so I think if I sign with Columbia Records, it might happen. And sing. I'm just saying that's how I feel because I want to help California. But it wouldn't be me doing it. It would be God doing it. I wouldn't take the credit or the glory or nothing. Humbly say, do you think that's possible?
I don't know if it's possible, but here's what I do know. I do know that we gain inspiration from Torah. And the way I look at Torah, the way I look at our ancestors from Torah, is we gain inspiration from both their positive traits and their, I don't like to use the word negative, their not so positive traits. And so I think all aspects of this is learning, right? What we learn from them, what they offer to others, the inspiration that they offer to us as individuals, and then the inspiration that they offer to the community. It is clear that Miriam was an inspiration.
I mean, miracle.
Miriam inspired Moses and the Israelites in the moment. And I think it's safe to say that Miriam has inspired the generations that has followed.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes. Mara, I see your hand raised, and then Meryl, I think your hand raised as well.
Yeah, I have a question, and I'm not sure if it's on track with the discussion or not, but I came across in something I was reading this morning, the comment that there's no prayer without sacrifice.
Mm.
And I'm trying to think of that in terms of leadership, that there's no leadership without sacrifice, that if you in your prayers, you're in some way seeking to be a leader, be holy and be a leader. And you can't do that without sacrifice, which is exactly what Moses was asked to do.
I want to comment on that in just one moment, and I'm going to hold that up there. Meryl, would love to hear your thoughts on this, but Mara, I want to come back to that.
So I'm thinking that in a way, Moses was an inspiration because he took on this burden. It wasn't a pleasant burden. He had to deal with it. As somebody involved as myself for 40 some odd years with, synagogue management type stuff, there were always burdens that came across my desk for whatever reason. And I think you are a leader if you figure out a way to handle these burdens. And yeah, there were times when I'd come running out of my office screaming and everybody was like, oh, we were waiting for that. And so in a way, it finally got to me, the complaints. But we all have complaints. Picture this journey, not knowing where you were going or what was going to happen. I mean, I try to be really positive, but I'd probably be out there complaining with everyone else. The question I had was, Lorraine asked something about the Havra Kadisha, and I wasn't sure if that was because did Moses have a Havra Kadisha or call one in, or was there one at the time?
Good question. So we're going to get back to that. So one, I want to touch upon this burden of leadership, and then let's get to this suggestion on the Havra Kadisha. So remember, when Moses dies at the end of Deuteronomy, it says, and never again was there a prophet like Moses to arise among Israel. And so it's important for us to think about this idea of prophet. That, Rabbi Michael Melchior, from the Maimad party in the Knesset a number of years ago, once spoke about this idea of prophet. And sometimes we get the idea of prophet wrong. We sometimes think of prophecy and prophets as someone who saw the future. But when we really look at a prophet, when it comes to Moses as well as a prophet when it comes to the likes of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Micah. Prophets didn't necessarily see the future. Prophets had the burden of communicating with God and speaking truth to the unpopular opinions of the time. Right? Remember, it was Isaiah and Jeremiah that had the burden of being this in between, of hearing from God, you need to go tell the people that they're doing wrong and they need to repent. And then really going to the people and having the people say, whatever, our life is good. We're going to do what we're doing. Who are you? You're just but one person screaming at the gates. So there is this burden of prophecy. And now Maimonides suggests that, like, what was the punishment? Or why was Moses punished? Well, he was punished because, in a sense, he lost faith. He lost his temper. Right? Yeah. Well, why was he punished? Because he lost his temper? Well, because when you're put in a position of leadership, there's a burden that you have to rise above. But then Nachmanides goes one step further. And Nachmanides suggests, in a sense, that the true sin that Moses committed was that he claimed too much power for himself. Which is fascinating that Nachmanides says this, because last week's Torah portion, Korach, well, that was the complaint of Korach, right? When Korach assembled his, merry band of fellows, and they went to Moses and Aaron, they accused them of taking too much power. And what happened to Korach and his fellows? Well, the earth opened up and sucked them in. But now Nachmanides is claiming that the sin of Moses was that he was claiming too much power. And what was the power? It's that Moses didn't necessarily have faith in God, and he struck the rock and he yelled at the people. Moses, yes. Was he set up to fail? Or is it another example that leadership is difficult? Right? Everyone wants to be a leader. Everyone wants to be the number one until we get there and we realize that there's more decisions, right, than there is power. That there's more walking the fine line than really being able to run around and do whatever we want to do. Moses experienced this. He was exhausted, right? Think about this. This isn't the first time Moses is exhausted. Go way back to Exodus, and his father-in-law, Jethro, had to, in a sense, say to Moses, you're going to burn out. You need to delegate. You're doing too much. I think this is a moment here where we could also look internally at Moses and say, you're tired. You're burnt out. There's too much on your plate. And I think it's important for us to recognize that. For when we see a leader in our own time, when we see them begin to burn out, how can we intercept, in a sense, before it's too late? Now let's get back to this question that Lorraine asked earlier about the Hever Kadisha, right? And so this idea that what's the job of the Hever Kadisha? The job of the Hever Kadisha is really to handle the dead, to clean, to cover, to prepare them for proper burial. Now, this idea of the Hever Kadisha comes up much later, right? We see it discussed in Talmud. We really see it discussed in Shulchan Aruch, right? And so this idea of what does that mean according to this Torah portion? Well, this Torah portion gets expanded a lot more in commentary and Talmud. And there's a special place for the Hever Kadisha so that they are allowed to do these rituals, yet not be separated from the community. That the holiness of what the Hever Kadisha does and the specifics of what they're asked to do prevents them from becoming, in a sense, impure. So they can do the holy job of caring for the dead and preparing them for burial without them themselves having to be restricted, so to say, quarantined from the rest of the community.
Rabbi, I just wanted to say thank you, because it's like that piece of every day you learn something new. Good. And I was wondering, honestly, how do you get to do that if you're going to become impure and then be taken out of, the nation? And, right. And that was, okay. So thank you so much for addressing that question.
But there's something else I wanted to touch upon here. When we go to the very beginning of this Torah portion and the sacrifice it asked us to make, right? So we're here at chapter 19, and it's asking for us to bring that red cow without blemish, in which there is no defect. Think for a moment. Have we ever touched upon something that is without blemish and without defect? And then skip ahead one chapter in which a lot of us feel, again, Moses was set up to fail. He does this one wrong thing. What happens in this moment? Moses receives a blemish, right? An internal blemish for the sin that he created. In a sense, there is an impossibility here. That the purity that is being asked of one is a bar that can only be attained in that promised land, in Olam Haba, right? In that utopian society that we're striving ever to get towards, but we're never going to make it.
I think newborn babies are perfectly blemish free.
Yeah, and this idea that we've tried so hard over these last years to reinterpret Torah to, in a sense, say that which is blemished is holy. Like, in a sense, we were all created with a blemish. Thus, we were all created holy. Right? And this idea of the purity, is that really what we should be striving for? And so Mara, going back to your earlier comment, maybe, and this is a huge, and then Benjamin, I want to hear what you have to say. There's an element of High Holy Days here, Mara, into what you had said, in that when we come to the High Holy Days, we're not asked to enter the High Holy Days having a pure year behind us. We're asked to come to the High Holy Days having the wherewithal to see our sins, to see our blemishes, and to engage in a true repentance. Right? It's not that who's come to this year perfect, who's come to this year ready to acknowledge what we have done wrong and make a true teshuvah. Benjamin, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Rabbi, and good Shabbos. This is going back to your comments about leadership. And when I think of leaders and really titans of business, so not comparing a titan of business to Moses, I mean, a person that has a company that can, increase the value, the equity to its shareholders and such. But the great leaders that I've worked under have a bit of a, lack of a better term, a sociopathic characteristic to their nature, in that, yes, they care about their company, they care about their stock price, but if the need comes to fire 5,000 people, they can do that without great concern for those individuals, because they know it's for the good of the company. So I know that's a bit conflicting with some of your comments, and I don't think it's one is mutually exclusive, but I don't see that out often in these business leaders, again, not comparing them to Moses, but that altruism as a quality that can make or often does reflect in a great business leader.
Absolutely, I love that.
Can I speak to that for a minute?
Please.
Yes. A person who contributes to society in a very special way. Let's talk about Picasso, in music, perhaps, or any of those great composers, perhaps Leonard Bernstein, in conducting, perhaps even later, people that have gone beyond their own talent and genius, already contributed to others who follow. We all admit that Picasso contributed the amount of tools of different kinds of looking at a different way to look at art in all the various phases.
Yeah, Miriam, would you mind speaking a little closer? Just
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm leaning back.
That's perfect. Speaking close, perfect.
My 95-year-old body is leaning back for a little balance. Balance out of but these people are, Benjamin mentioned, I think, sociopaths. We can call them that. They are out of society. They are not bound by having a lovely evening of small talk when they're totally driven to be doing their thing instead. For Bernstein, never ever composing more fantastic melodies. And music doesn't necessarily have to be melodious like that. There are other ways of looking at music too. So these people are driven people. That doesn't mean that all driven people will make their mark in society. But certainly in order to do that, you have to step out of society, not in such a conscious way. You're not even knowing that you're doing it very often. But you can't be expected to perhaps engage in, little talk that is all in a dinner meeting. This person would much rather be at home doing what they have to do. And so I want to just emphasize that point. So I would not call them a sociopath, but I would surely call them out of society. Steps out and beyond.
Thank you. Meryl, you had your hand raised, please. And then Gary.
Oh, I've always had issues in my head with this blemish thing. You know, we bring out, we're supposed to do in the olden days, we were supposed to bring out, whatever animal it was appropriate for whatever sacrifice, and the assumption that on the outside, this animal is pure, but if they were to cut it open, would it necessarily be pure? And that goes to people. When you're born, you think you're pure, or you think your baby's pure, and somewhere after they're born, as they're getting older, you might find some health issue. My parents thought, they had a perfect baby until I was 6 months old, and they found out I had asthma and all kinds of other health issues. So the person that you find out later on isn't so pure. Where does that put them in the line of, I don't know that any of the last 70 some odd years worth of health issues were issues that were noticeable or had a name 3,000 years ago. But where does that put somebody now who, and I'm 72, so 72 years ago, 6 months later, they found out theoretically, I wasn't so pure. So where does that put people in this perspective of having to be pure, or assumption of having to be pure? That can happen with an animal too.
Absolutely. I love that. Gary.
May I ask her? Can I tell her?
Hold on just one moment. I do want to hear what Gary has to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to not push back, but maybe look at another face of Moses and the sin and the punishment. That certainly Moses, we could say Moses sinned and was punished, but also the lesson might be Moses didn't sin. It's just the Torah teaching us that different leaders are required for different times. And he was a good journey leader, but Joshua is a leader for the next stage. And, don't take this so personally. And that the punishment of not seeing the promised land is a punishment if the promised land is a geographical place. But maybe it's a reminder that none of us get to finish some work. There's always, it's never completely done. And, that doesn't keep us from starting it or working on it. But just the lesson is that for us, we're not going to see the promised land. You might see your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, but not your great-great-grandchildren. And you might not cure or fix the nation's healthcare system, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do something about it. So sin and punishment, yes, but also maybe just a lesson, different leaders, different times, and you're not going to see it finished. So, but don't stop.
I love that. I want to touch upon that. I saw that Benjamin had his hand raised and there are a few others, but I want to touch upon that. I love that idea.
And I just wanted to comment on that purity question. And to me, I equate it with the term tabula rasa, or blank slate, that baby, even though it may not be perfect, other things, but there's purity in the beginning of life.
So think about it this way. I want to take us back to that first moment when God interacts with Moses at the burning bush. And Moses is, we know about Moses's earlier life, from the basket to the kingdom, to now just being that shepherd. And God says to Moses, right, in a sense, this is you. You have been tasked with this leadership to go free the Israelites. And what does Moses say? Mi anochi. Who am I? Who am I that I should go down, right? This and tradition tells us that Moses' response to God saying, you are going to free the Israelites, Moses' response, mi anochi, who am I? That is the exact reason why Moses was called upon by God. God wanted someone not who lacked self-confidence, but who was humble enough to say, why me? Right? It wasn't the case that God said, right? It wasn't the case that God said, Moses, go down to free the Israelites. And Moses says, I've been waiting for you to ask me to do that. Like, thank you. I'm the only one that could do that. I know the language. I know them. I know how they play. No, right? Moses says, but remember, a few sentences later, Moses says to God, now I'm going to go down there and they're going to ask me what your name is. What should I tell them? Now remember, there's 70 names of God. God could have said anything. And what does God say? My name is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Now, talk about a name that could be interpreted. Well, some people say, well, what that means, I am who I am. But others say the name can be translated as, I will be that which I will be. And what's an interpretation of I will be that which I will be? Well, it's in a sense God saying, I'm always in a process of becoming. Right? I am that which I am complete. I am fixed. I am that which I will be. I'm always in a process. And so it almost links upon Gary's thing. It's almost God is almost teaching us we're never complete. We're always journeying. The Joel I am today, it's going to be a different Joel 40 years from now. And how do I know that? Because I'm following God's instruction. I was created, B'Tselem Elohim, in God's image. And God is constantly learning with me. So God's in a process of becoming. I'm in a process of becoming. We're all in this relationship together. Right? And so what does this now say to Moses? You're a part of the process. The promised land, it's always further down. We're all journeying. We're all Israelites. And on this stage, on this journey, there are pockets of promise, right? There are pockets of beauty. And there are pockets of thirst. And that's how it all started. The Israelites were thirsty. They were physically thirsty. And I would venture to say that we were spiritually thirsty because the journey was hard for them. We're asking them to be a brand new people overnight while constantly wandering. Right? Don't be slaves anymore. You're a free people. Oh, by the way, you're a free people, but you have to listen to God who's going to tell you what to do and what not to do. And you see this person, Moses, he's your leader, but he's not really your leader. He's just God's emissary. But he's going to do some stuff which is going to make you think that he's a leader. But then he's going to do some other stuff where we're going to be upset with it. It's a process of becoming. And it's not perfect. And that's beautiful. Because when Torah becomes perfect, then we tend to think that our lives today are not perfect and it was great back then. And remember, the Israelites were like, well, why can't we just go back to Egypt? Egypt was perfect, right? We always have this moment that when we're thirsty for something, back then seemed great. But there's so much here. We're thirsty, back then seemed great, right now seemed horrible. Oh, and by the way, what's a punishment? A punishment means you can't get to the future. We're dealing with past, present, and future all in this one moment, reminding us that when we are in need, the past looks great, but the future is still our promise. Benjamin, you had your hand raised.
Apologies, Rabbi. I have left my hand up from before.
Oh, okay.
My
Not a
apologies.
problem. Miriam.
I need to thank you, Rabbi, for what you just said. At 95 and a half years old, I still stand up very straight. I try to. And I've 10. I still drive. I'm grateful for everything when I wake up. So people say, what's your secret? I have no secret. I don't have it. I'm always learning. I see as many rabbis as I possibly can. I'm very fortunate to have a very tremendous intensity. The practice, seminary. So what you just said, I need to thank you enormously because it validates, it encourages us, it puts us in a place of never stopping. We are always on the journey. We will never achieve it. I've heard people say, oh Lord, help me find the Lord, help me find you, oh Lord, but save me from people who have found you. So that we are on this constant, non-finished, always aspiring, never reaching journey. And that's how I view my own personal life, having lived so many decades, having had God been so enormously good to me on a personal level. And I think perhaps we can all take that we will never achieve, but we must never, ever stop striving to achieve. Thank you.
Miriam, thank you so much for saying that. And again, what you just said and what I think everyone has offered here is the prime example of why we have to read Torah like this. Because Dayenu, had God simply said, hey, Moses, 3 chapters later, you were great for the journey. We're going to ask you to hand over the reins. Like, you did what you need to do. Now let somebody else take over. Aaron, you got the priesthood started. Thumbs up to you. Now give it over to your sons. They're going to take it from here. Torah didn't say that. Torah said, this is the punishment. This is why. And had Torah said that, well, Torah study would have been boring for the last few thousands of years. But continuing revelation teaches us that we have to look between, that we have to take our modern sense of how the body works, of how the mind works, on how groupthink works, and interpret this. Yes, please.
I was just going to say, Rabbi, I believe, Miriam, thank you for what you said. We'll never reach the promised land, but we come to believing in yourself and the law of attraction. We create with our mind what we want, and we've got universe, God brings it to us. I got to keep believing.
I love that. And so we have the sense here that maybe there wasn't this punishment after all. Maybe this was always a part of the plan. Or maybe, as Mara told us earlier, there was a lack of teshuvah here. that we almost want Moses to know better. You made a mistake, not a grave mistake, you made a mistake. But you need to teach God and you need to teach the people that, especially in leadership, when you make a mistake, you have to own up to it, right? I had a mentor that said once early on, Joel, the best thing you can do is eat dirt and eat dirt quickly. Because when you let it fester, it gets worse. Moses, you lost your cool. You called the Israelites rebels. They're thirsty. They don't have the game plan. I've said this to my wife and kids 1,000 times because they always say to me on the high holy days, I don't know how you do it, being up there the whole time. And I always say to them, I have a run of show in front of me. I don't know how you do it sitting there in the congregation. You don't know what reading's next. I can throw you a curveball anytime. I could say, hey, we're on page 93. Guess what? We're going to go back to page 65. Right? But I have a game plan in front of me. Same thing here in the desert. The Israelites, they had no idea what was going on. They didn't know what was happening until Moses and Aaron decided to let them know what was happening. So yeah, they're thirsty. They're thirsty for water. They're thirsty for information. They're thirsty for a little bit of, hey, just let us know what's happening. Moses lost his cool. He called them rebels. He forgot that he gets to communicate with God. He gets to know the game plan. He gets to know what happens next. Those people, they're just following him with faith. Right? Talk about faith, and we don't talk about this enough. Right? Rashi and Maimonides, they always talk about Moses didn't have enough faith in God. Think about the faith of the Israelites. We never talk about the faith of the Israelites. You stiff-necked people, you rebels, you're complaining that you want to go back to Egypt. Those are those moments. Those are those moments that we can pick and choose. But for the majority of those 40 years, the everyday Israelite, they had an enormous amount of faith to continue that journey. They had an enormous amount of faith to live as a slave people, to pack up their belongings overnight, to follow someone who just came to be their leader that they hadn't seen in years. The faith that the everyday Israelite had was enormous, and we never give them their credit. Meryl, please.
Even in today's world, if you don't have faith of some kind, if you don't have knowledge of what's going on and you're stuck in the middle of something, it's hard to have faith. It's hard not to be angry. I mean, I've been dealing this with my car for a week now. So, and I finally went to the place this morning and I said, hello, is there any news? But I mean, if you're not informed, and I don't care what the situation is, it's worth with health issues, financial issues, etc. Everybody has their own issues. But if you're not informed in one way or another, and you have no clue what's going on or what that future might be, it's hard to have faith.
Yeah. Leaders always say to their followers, trust the process. Well, it's easy to say,
hard.
It's easy to say trust the process when you're the one creating the process. It's really hard to trust the process when you are given one step at a time. So in this moment, I have great amount of sympathy and respect for the Israelites. They were thirsty. They do not know what happens next. We don't know how long Moses and Aaron go to communicate with God. What's the preparation like before they meet with God? What's the process afterwards? So it's important for us in this moment to look at the whole page here. Everyone's in an enormous amount of pressure. And from a very practical standpoint, the Sinai desert is hot. If you've ever been to Sinai before, I've been there a few times, beautiful, but hot as can be. So it's important to look at the whole board. But this wasn't easy. We're allowed times to break. We're allowed times to just fall apart. And I think a modern interpretation of this would be Moses looking at the people and saying, it must be hard to be thirsty. I get it. Let me go see what I can do for you. But it's hot and he's tired and the journey has been long. But it's the process that is holy, not just the promised land. And I think if we could take that with us into Shabbat, that maybe the promised land is the actual journey that we're on. And I know we should never reinterpret Torah for itself, but I think the journey is in itself a promise. Also, being the fact they were stuck in slavery in Egypt, I think wandering in a beautiful Sinai desert was promise enough. On that note, if there are no further questions, I think a resounding unmuted Shabbat Shalom would be a beautiful way to enter the Shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
That was
everybody.
wonderful.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Have a good
Shabbat
weekend.
Shalom.
Thank
Bye,
you,
healthy.
everyone.
Bye
Be
now.
well.
Be well. Thank
Shalom.
you.
Rabbi, I hope
Bye.
you can join us again.
I do too. This is a wonderful way for me to begin Shabbat.
Who can we implore that you join us again?
I'll make a call.
You can tell them. You can quote us.
Be well, everybody. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.